Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. The current session focuses on social class as a social correlate. I hope and expect that by the end of this session you would have clarity on the idea. Well, my dear students, at the outset of the session I would like you to think for a while, what do you think is a social class? Well, apparently it seems that the term social class is something very common, and we all know that. And we generally take it as kind of idea that is for granted for us. However, now that I ask you to think about the idea of social class, probably you would find some confusion related to that. Well, social class is a central concept in sociolinguistic research, and it is one of the small number of other social variables that operate when it comes to the use of language in sociolinguistics. You know, whereas there is, for example, age, gender, for example, area or region, etc. as other variables, social class is one important variable that operates as a correlate when it comes to the language choices of people as individuals as well as groups. Well, my dear students, Trudgell 1974 asserts most members of our society have some kind of idea, intuitive or otherwise, of what social class is, and both specialists and layperson agree on that. According to him, most of the times social class is defined, in a very ad hoc manner, and this becomes very ironic because when we go into the details of how we define it, there is a lot of ambiguity that is related to the term. Social class as a correlate is very important when it comes to sociolinguistics research. And despite the lack of consensus that linguists and sociolinguists have on defining the term, still, it has its significance and it cannot be overlooked when it comes to any kind of studies or research in sociolinguistics. I'm going to try to define it for you in some technical ways. So if you look at the screen, you can see a definition of social class. It is a measure of status which is often based on occupation, income, and wealth, but can also be measured in terms of aspirations and mobility. Now, there are certain things that are important in this particular definition. I would like you to focus on the screen for a while where you can notice these. It can be measured in terms of occupation. In every society, there are certain occupations that are considered to be more important or more prestigious. Then it is also measured in terms of income and wealth. The more one has wealth, the more one is rich, would be considered to belonging to the higher class. This is another idea related to social class. But very interestingly, according to this definition, there are two other aspects that I'm going to mention: aspirations and mobility. What do you idealize? What do you want to be? What do you aspire to be? And the upward mobility. These are the ideas that determine, the social class of a particular person or a particular group. When it comes to the sociological background of the idea of social class, I would say there are certain theoretical considerations that need to be taken into account. In the modern times, the idea of social class has gathered a lot of significance. It has sparked remarkable recognition through the times in the society, resulting from the Industrial Revolution and, in the second half of the 18th century, the kind of socioeconomic changes that came. Social class has become a very significant variable in deciding, the identities of people in the social setups, and thus in determining their linguistic identities as well. When this social class is looked at from the perspectives of intellectual basis in theories of social and political economies dating back from the 19th century, they look at the idea of social class as, a product of the modern times as well. Theories of social class are associated with certain people, with certain figures like Karl Marx and Max Weber. They were the people actually who contributed to this idea of, social system where there is a kind of a socio-economic stratification of people into different classes. Well, my dear students, the idea in sociolinguistics, the idea of social class has come from sociology. And it was in fact in 1838 that Auguste Comte, a French philosopher who was also a social reformer, that he for the first time, discussed this term in sociology. Nearly a century and a half later, Wright 1979 quoted that sociology has only one independent variable, and that is class. Now this quote becomes very important if you look at the screen. Sociology has only one independent variable, that is class. There can be other variables, for example age, for example gender, for example region, etc. But according to this definition, they are all dependent variables. This variable is the only variable that stays consistent and that is independent in itself. Karl Marx, 1818 to 83, developed the first and one of the most influential theories of social class. He drew a fundamental distinction between those who produce the capital or resources and those who control the production of this capital. So according to him, there are two main classes in the society. One, those who produce all the resources. The other, who control the production of the resources and thus who also control those who produce the resources. In the former are the working class according to Marx, and in the latter are the middle class people, or the capitalists who control this whole system of the production of all the products, the resources, the economic resources that contribute towards the society. Max Weber later on, from 1864 to 1920, emerged as the second person who contributed towards this classical theory of social class and added further to it. While Marx was more focused on socialism, Weber's point of view was more tilted towards what we may call industrial capitalism. He in fact was opposed to the idea of socialism that Marx had propagated through his works. However, he agreed to Marx on certain issues as well. For example, on the issues of ownership or non-ownership of property, according to Marx, that was a fundamental idea in determining the class of a person who has some, ownerships of certain properties in different forms would be, a person belonging to a higher class, whereas the other person who would not have it would be from the lower class. So ownership was taken as a variable by Marx, and Weber also, kind of supported him in that idea. The idea or the dimension of power and prestige was also attached to this concept of ownership. The more one owns these resources, the more one owns these properties, the more prestige, as well as the concept of power is more attached to that person or to that group, and that power is translated into the language of that person as well as that group as well. The idea of social class thus had two important components associated with it. One, the objective economic measures of property ownership and the power and control that it confers on its, possessors, having property and ownership, and the power that is associated with it, how, it becomes a gain, or it becomes a kind of, a property in itself for the possessors of that property. And secondly, the subjective measures of prestige, and reputation and status. So, as ownership leads towards power. This power leads towards a kind of prestige, which ends up with, giving a kind of a certain class to these people that is superior to other people. So, with this idea, I hope can understand how social class plays a very, very significant role in determining the linguistic choices of people. If you think of your own surroundings, if your own, social setup where you live, I hope you can understand it by looking at the context that people from different class use language in different ways, and their language, that the choices that they make, the choices of words and phrases of the language itself, the kind of switches that they make in, codes, all they clearly reflect their social class.